This scene in Deadpool and Wolverine looks awful. It looks absolutely awful, and we've seen it in most of the marketing for the movie. I've seen a lot of viral posts about this, including one person say that Deadpool and Wolverine might be the worst looking film of all time, and I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but suffice to say, this scene looks really, really bad, and a lot of people have been noticing. A comparison picture has gone around comparing one of the old Hugh Jackman Wolverine films, X-Men Origins Wolverine, to this film, and just seeing the contrast of how bad this movie looks by comparison. The commercials that they have done for this movie look exactly the same as the film itself. It just is a really awful looking, unappealing scene. But why does it look so bad? Why does this scene from X-Men Origins Wolverine, which was an objectively horrible film, and not one that I would consider having the best cinematography either, look so much better? Well, that's what I'm going to get into in this video. I'm going to go through all the things that they have apparently done in this scene and why it looks just so awful. First, let's talk about the kind of camera that each of these movies used. The first image is obviously shot on film, and that gives it an automatically more grainy look because film just was a little bit more dated, while Deadpool and Wolverine is being shot on digital, and cameras have advanced so much that everything looks so crisp, everything looks so clean, and that's the first difference between these two images. However, film can also look really, really crisp and clean, so that's not inherently the problem, and you can artificially make things look a lot more grainy these days in post-production, but that's the first difference between the two that we're seeing. One looks a little bit more dirtier, one looks infinitely cleaner, and that's just an element that we need to keep in mind for this image going forward, is that Deadpool and Wolverine is shot on digital, everything is clear, you can see everything, and that brings us to our next point. As people have pointed out, this scene was shot on location, but it wasn't just shot on location. This was shot in broad daylight. Now, let me explain. One of the things that makes films look good is the lighting, and the purpose of lighting is basically to sculpt images and make them look better, make them look more interesting, and that is one of the other differences you'll see between this picture from X-Men Origins of Wolverine and this picture from Deadpool and Wolverine. There's shadows on his face, while there's no shadows whatsoever on Hugh Jackman's face for Deadpool and Wolverine. Now, the whole deal there is they're shooting in broad daylight, and typically it's known that it's shooting in broad daylight and high noon is like the worst time to shoot, because in broad daylight there's going to be no shadows over anything, and that doesn't necessarily look the best. That's why they say the best times to shoot are golden hour, 6 in the morning or 6 in the evening, because that's when the sun is either in the east or in the west, and you can have the sun behind you as a backlight automatically. It just looks a lot nicer when you have sort of a shape around your head, or maybe you have it at the side so that there's a shadow at the side. You can shoot in golden hour and basically have no equipment and make it look good because of how nice it looks in the evening or in the early morning based on where the sun is positioned, and you don't really have as much control over the sun at high noon. However, with technology and lighting techniques, you can still shoot in broad daylight and make it look nice. You can use camera filters to do that. I have a camera filter that I now use. You can see in other behind the scenes how they'll put out these mats, sometimes white mats to catch light, or even black mats to also catch light and absorb it, and basically that's how they get lighting to look good when they're shooting in broad daylight so that everything isn't as blown out. So shooting in broad daylight as they're doing is not inherently a bad choice, and certainly most professional films are going to have to make it so it's possible to do that, because sometimes that's where the scene is set. But I just wanted to establish that that's why everything is going to be bright, everything is going to have no shadows whatsoever, and that's an important component to remember going forward. There's no shadows, there's no sculpting in this image, and it is incredibly crisp and clean due to shooting on digital. I would also like to point out, though, that in terms of shooting everything very bright and very open, Deadpool and Wolverine is a comedy, and oftentimes comedies will have little lighting or the least lighting possible because they want to give you that bright, airy feel. But it still looks really dour and dull at the same time, and let's go forward into the other problems with the images and why it looks so bad beyond even that. Another thing that makes images in films look so good and look so enticing is the production design. But production design not only makes things look aesthetically pleasing, and that might not necessarily be the goal of your scene, but you also need to consider production design in terms of separating your characters and the places that you want to look from their backgrounds, and that is a huge problem with this scene. You've got a basically beige background background and beige colors all around. And then we have Sabretooth come up. And Sabretooth has beige hair and sort of beige skin and a brownish beige outfit. And that's what looks so bad about this image right here, is that it's beige on beige on beige on beige. You can see that there's a little depth from the camera, that the character is in focus and the background is not, but that doesn't matter because everything is the same ugly color. There is nothing about the actor that makes him stand out. There is nothing that draws your eye to anything. It just looks awful and it makes you want to look away from the screen. And that's the big problem, is cinematography and whatnot, whatever the goal is, should at least make you want to look at the subject and look at what's happening. But that is the real big problem, is that they chose a really ugly location for this. They chose costuming that would all look the same. It just all blends together and looks like mud. I would also like to say, I think the fact that it is so bright in all of this, and you've got an actor, this is the guy who played Sabretooth in the original 2000 X-Men film, not hidden by any lighting whatsoever. You can see the dated costume and makeup that they're using, and it really points out all the flaws and makes it look very fake. I think that that's another problem. But the thing is, not everything in this scene is beige or gray. Obviously, Deadpool and Wolverine are wearing two bright, primary colored outfits, and that would be a good way to separate them from everything else that is going on in the background. You've got an ugly gray or beige background, and then you've got these characters who are wearing very bright, cheerful colors. Our eyes should be drawn to those characters because of what they're wearing to everything else in comparison. And even if you look at the behind-the-scenes set photos for this image, it looks a lot better than this. It looks brighter. The colors of the outfits look better. The colors of the sun out, even in this ugly location, look a lot better. So what is the problem? Well, the problem is something that I have personally been complaining about filmmaking for a long time: the color grading. I get to complain about color grading! Yes, 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 I get to complain about how much I hate color grading! Yeah, I hate color grading and how it's used in a lot of films today. Yes, there are films like, for example, Cinderella or Wonder Woman that use color grading to good effect in terms of making very dreamy, fairy tale-like scenarios where all the colors are oversaturated and it looks unnatural, but it's supposed to, because once again, we're looking at fairy tale scenarios. I'm not saying that any tool that we have come up for filmmaking is inherently bad or that it doesn't have a purpose, but my problem with color grading these days is, for whatever reason, people have decided that color grading is mandatory for everything, that we need to barf out color grading on everything. The problem with Deadpool and Wolverine is when you build up all these decisions, shooting in broad daylight, having a lot of unappealing imagery with the production design where things blend in, shooting digitally. None of these are inherently bad decisions, but they all add up when you add in that they, for whatever reason, they decided to color grade everything with a gray tint. So these suits don't stand out like they should. Everything looks gray in this film compared to what you see in those production photos, and that is what just comes together with all these bad decisions to make it look like such an ugly image. There's no lighting, there's nothing that really draws your eyes to a scene. Even when they have good colors that separate them from the very ugly background, they drown them out with gray color grading. Now, maybe they did that because they didn't want the image to look too bright, because they want this to be taken seriously as an action movie as well as a comedy, but I think that that was a bad choice because it is adding together with all these decisions to make it look like a just mud. It does not look like an appealing image at all. But there is even more about these images that I want to talk about, this cinematography that I think is really detrimental to it. Remember, going back to the crisp, clear look that we're shooting on digital and all of these decisions that they make that aren't inherently bad. Like, a movie can still look good if it's shot on digital and looks really crisp and clean. However, we're working with a fight scene here, and it looks like Wolverine has gotten pretty beat up and the characters are pretty beat up, and that's what they're going for in this scene. However, once again, going back to that really clean image, it doesn't really feel like that. It's a really dusty area that they're in, but the image is completely clean. There's not dust rising up from anywhere or anything like that. And that brings me to one of the main differences between this image that we were talking about with Wolverine and this image here of Hugh Jackman in the movie. Do you notice what is a huge difference here? In one image, Hugh Jackman is angry and sweating. It looks like he's been through a lot. It looks like he's ready to fight another time and that he's really going going through it. In this image, despite Logan going through a lot again, he's completely sweatless. He's completely clean. It looks like a professional makeup crew just came through and touched him up. And that is the real problem here. With all these decisions that we're talking about, one image looks real, like you're actually seeing something like this play out because of all the elements, from the lighting to the sweat on his face to everything really, to another that is so clean, from the crisp digital camera to no sweat on his face to everything. One looks like it actually happened, like you're actually watching a real story play out. One just looks like a guy putting on a performance in the camera. The purpose of a film is to immerse you and get your senses to believe that something is actually happening, even if you know that they're not. The Deadpool and Wolverine cinematography makes everything look too crisp and clean to make it really feel like something's actually happening. It just looks like you're watching two actors in costume pretending to fight, which is what it actually is. It's not actually immersing you in the story. And on top of that, everything looks bad aesthetically because you put in a gray filter over everything when everything should be bright, as they shot on location for it to look bright. And there's one last thing I want to criticize about this scene in Deadpool of Wolverine: the sense of space. Now, maybe this is because we've just seen way too many set photos and way too many production photos of this scene on Deadpool and Wolverine to know exactly what kind of space that they're in. But for me, when I look at the scene, it kind of breaks my immersion. There's just no sense of that they're supposed to be in this like time void, but there's just no sense of that. It feels like they got the actors in costumes and drove up to a random dusty lot to film some scenes of them pretending to fight, because that's what they did. I don't know if it's, once again, just that we've seen too many production stills of it, or that their production design for this scene is just a dusty lot with some props in the background, but there's nothing about this open space that makes me feel like this is actually a time void. It feels like I could walk over a hill and see the actors' trailers. I don't think that this production design, as simplistic as it is really immersing me in the scene and convincing me that I'm going to a place. But I'd like to conclude, none of this means that Deadpool and Wolverine will be a bad story, because there are plenty of movies out there that have bad cinematography and bad choices that still the story is good. You know, one of my earlier short films that I did looked awful because I didn't know what I was doing in that area, but people told me that that was my best one because they really liked the story, and that actually got the most views yet. My latest one that I did, everyone told me it looks a lot better, but they weren't as into the story, and so it didn't really pick up. So remember, story first. Story matters most out of anything, but cinematography does matter to a degree, and I just wanted to explain why the Deadpool and Wolverine cinematography and the look of the film is so unappealing despite so much money being spent on it. Remember, it doesn't matter how much money you spend on something. It doesn't matter the equipment you have. There are films made hundreds of years ago when most film equipment wasn't even invented yet that still are more appealing today because of how creative the artists were with what the limitations that they have. These days, we have so much technology, things like color grading just get overused. Just because people have access to more technology doesn't mean that they're necessarily as good at using it as others. And I have to say, I've actually been gravitating towards older films in part because I like that they're a lot more natural and they look a lot more natural without all the color grade and digital barfing that we do today. But that is why Deadpool and Wolverine look so awful. The choices that they made on the scene in production design, yes, but also the choices that they made in post. And it doesn't always have to be CGI that's mucking things up. But that is all I got for you guys today, and I make my videos and edit them all by myself. I'm doing this completely by myself. So if you want to support me with what I'm doing on this channel, and if you like this video, please consider checking out my Patreon, as these wonderful people have done, and I will see you guys in the next video.
Look, Pim, I know it's our job to help this guy and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause. He's obviously made up his mind. Why don't we just cut our losses and get out of here?